Hello. So, this is the long patrol for the Dragonfly class and other gunboat service in World War II. And honestly, this long patrol is part of my ongoing series of small ships actually had a big impact too and were kind of useful, but we forget about them because they don't do the big things that we hear about a lot of. You think, in the nicest way, half the memory of the PT boats in their service in Pacific War is thanks to President Kennedy, who served on one. And because he did, and he's quite famous, lots of people have remembered them and actually talk about them. But the trouble is, you don't get a lot about it. And this started off with the Dragonfly class because they are a species of gunboat. There are lots of gunboats in World War II. Didn't go back too far back, didn't watch you do. Good boy. So, gunboats happen. And they come in various different species. Now, it started off with the Dragonfly class. Sorry, repeating myself a bit there. But because someone asked a question on one of my videos about the Dragonfly class, going, what are they? You've talked about the Insect class, you've talked about those gunboats and all the things they get up to. What about the Dragonfly class? Where were they? What were they doing? Well, the Dragonfly class, sadly enough, have the fault of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's something we're going to get into. But they were actually the newest of the Royal Navy's gunboats in World War II. Before they enter World War II, the most recent gunboats to be completed are Dragonflies, which were laid down in December 1937, November 1938, December 1938, 1937. There was another one called B, which was planned, but cancelled in March 1940 without being completed. No one's quite sure whether it was laid down or not, but we know it was cancelled in March 1940. The Royal Navy were building gunboats. Why? Because they were useful. They were being used for the China station, for going up the Yangtze River, for all the presence missions they had going on. You needed a gunboat. Let's put it this way. Today, when we want to send a group inshore from a warship to go and talk, let's say we're communicating with the locals, we are dropping off aid supplies, we're helping out, but basically we're demonstrating how far we can reach as well. We're being helpful, being friendly, but to maybe a less helpful, less friendly next door neighbour, we're showing just how far we can insert people. And those people this time, they're medics, they're engineers, they're come to help, but next time they might be Royal Marines who have other ideas of how to assist in a situation. Or rather, depending on the context, their ideas might change radically. In one context, they're here to help. In another context, they're here to help themselves to your explosives and to utilize those explosives on various things. Well, you had the river gunboats. You had these gunboats. Their purpose was to go upriver, go in, drop off people, say hello. However, when you look at them, you see small warships. They do look like the vessels of their time. Like the Insect class looked like a pre-dreadnought, being shrunk. These vessels, they honestly... well, they look like someone's taken features from Royal Navy small ship design and shrunk / cobbled it together. They're quite cool looking vessels. Armed with two 4-inch guns on single 40-degree mountings. So no, not really AA, sadly enough. one 3.7 inch Mark V howitzer, and 8 machine guns, sometimes mounted in those fabled quadruple Vickers mountings. Sometimes mounted singly. We can all be happy for the ones where they're mounted singly. Some of them had pom-poms and other things added on. In fact, pom-poms were quite popular to be added on. You know, it's always nice to have a pom-pom. They are, though, what they say. They are gunboats. But it's not just Britain which has them. Other nations have them. In fact, the first one, after my shameless book plug, well, this is an insect class gunboat. As I said, look, we'll get on to the next one, which is the Panay. As you can see, an insect class, as I said, does look like a sort of shrunken pre-dreadnought battleship. Look at it. Honestly, that is kind of the shaping. Gun fore, gun aft, secondaries along the sides. That's a pre-dread shrunk down. Why? Because it's a form which works, but it's designed into a river version or coastal version, and their purpose is to bring fire inshore, to get the firepower close to the enemy. They're useful for that. But they're also not really things you want to be fighting a fixed battle against something which is bigger than them in. You really don't. If we look at the history of gunboats, they do really rather well right up until they get fighting anything which isn't a gunboat. Saying that, though, there are some gunboats which did surprisingly well against things which were bigger than them, but they had an advantage. You see, this is a riverine inshore gunboat. It is designed to be a mobile gun platform for its purpose to provide support. In fact, riverine gunboats like this were increasingly common in the 1920s and 1930s. This is the Panay. This is an American river gunboat. And again, she's one of their Yangtze patrol vessels. She has all sorts of experience, but she's sunk by Japanese aircraft on the 12th of December 1937 in what's known as the Panay Incident. Why is she sunk? Well, she's in the wrong place. Right place according to the Americans, wrong place according to the Japanese. One of the interesting things about this story is, and this history, is that the Japanese claim that they sunk the Panay by mistake because the flag she was flying, the American Stars and Stripes, looked very similar to the Chinese flag at the time, which was a white sun on a solid blue background in the corner of a red, what's called a red field. I'm not quite sure how they are claiming that, but needs must when you make a mistake that big. The whole purpose of these ships was to provide protection for U.S. shipping nationals, other foreign forces, other foreign nationals who they might sort of want to protect, because most of the Yangtze River patrols, they're conducted by the British, they're conducted by the Americans, and there's a few other nations which have them there. The Germans have one for a while. Of course, after World War I they ceased to have one, but nations have them. The problem is your ships can only be in the places that your ships are in at any one time. So if you have 6 ships, you can be in a maximum of 6 places at once, and that includes maintenance. So, if you have 6 ships, and the Americans have 6 ships, and, well, you're friendly enough. This is another reason why I often point out there's a lot of cooperation going on for nations which some people suggest are, at points are looking at each other with avarice and desire to fight each other. No, not in the 1920s. In the 1920s, basically, the Royal Navy and the US Navy might as well be one navy on the Yangtze River. The amount of times that one gets into trouble, the other one turns up. When the Panay is damaged, the first vessels on the scene are 2 Royal Navy gunboats. The Americans don't have one close enough. And it's a case of, yeah, do we dawdle outside the fire zone because that would be sensible because we could get hit, or nope, charge straight in there, there's an American in stress. So there are lots of scenarios where British and American officers and diplomats are working very closely together, which builds up a very, very strong relationship for discussing things. Which doesn't mean you won't have disagreements, but that means that you've got a good relationship to have discussions about disagreements and go, if you have sensible governments, of course. But no, river gunboats, basically, they are the 1920s, they've been before that, 1930s version of a helicopter. They're how you project force inland, when you need to project force inland. And honestly, China in this period, we're thanks to a combination of their own issues with their own central government, or failed central government, the legacy of the Boxer Rebellion, the avarice of various powers cutting up sections of China for themselves, all the stuff that's hitting China at that time, it's pretty much a failed state. Now, we have the list of the whole planned Dragonfly Dare class. B, she of course was cancelled. Mosquito was lost at Dunkirk on the 1st of June 1940. Trying her best to get her class to say her charges to safety. And that really does mean something. These ships, yes, they lost a lot of them, but none of them went down easy. Not a single one went down easy that went down, and lots of them went down. It's kind of like it reminds me to extent of the Tribal class destroyers again. There ain't anything else that's as good as them available when they're there, so they go down, they do the job. And they go down, but they don't go down hard. One of them goes down, blasting away against the cruiser and 2 destroyers. She has no chance! But she still tries. Three are lost off Banker Strait. We'll get into those in a second. Mosquito Day. Lost off Dunkirk on the 1st of June 1940. And Dunkirk evacuation is definitely no fun. If we think about it, she was involved in the evacuation almost from the beginning. And it's the 1st of June when she sunk, but she took part on the 27th, 28th, 29th, and 30th of May. 1st of June she sunk. The evacuation runs to the 4th of June. And I know I started off by saying that it's not very fun, and that wasn't me being hubristic. That was me responding to what I've had recently. Some of the students I've been talking to who've seen recent movies about Dunkirk and the Hollywood glamorization of it, and I know they have to again for a movie, and it does actually somewhat of a decent job, although there are some serious issues in it. Serious. But the trouble is, I've seen better TV programs about it. in terms of getting the grime right and getting the sheer terror for the ships going in. Because even these vessels, which are as shallow draft as they are, manoeuvring in to a beach, manoeuvring in close to a mole, that close inshore, under attack, there's limited spaces you can actually move to. So you can't zig and zag properly to avoid bombs. You just have to keep sailing as fast as you can. And these are not fast. They're not designed to be fast. It's not their purpose to be fast. Their top speed is 17 knots. They had 2 Admiralty-type boilers, geared steam turbines, and had 2 shafts. But they displaced a total of 594 tons. And their entire installed power was 3,800 shaft horsepower. So how long do you think it took them to get to 17 knots? And do you think that was in a strong current? It's not good for them. It's not good. Dragonfly, Grasshopper and Scorpion. Now, they're an interesting story. They are part of the general retreat of forces, which are slowly pulled back from the China station down to Singapore as tensions rise. And from Singapore, they try to withdraw. Dragonfly, she sunk on the 13th of February 1942. No, not Dragonfly, Scorpion sunk on the 13th of February 1942, sorry. Notes flipped around on me. She was the one who went down versus a cruiser and some destroyers. She was carrying 250 passengers, 70 crew, and a few managed to survive. Scorpion had escaped Singapore on the 9th of February. Suffered air attacks, but was able to continue until she's encountered by the Japanese cruiser. Of the few survivors, 8 were picked up by the Japanese, and 6 more were found by a steamer, Matahari. Always useful. And this, by the way, there are 2 sources of information I'm using for this. I had my Dunkirk book out for the Dunkirk details about Mosquito. For these ones, there's an excellent link. There's an excellent website, which is the Evacuation of Singapore on the navalhistory.org, or Naval Historical Society of Australia webpage, written by Walter Burroughs, and it's really worth a read. And the whole section there is a quote from it. Dragonfly and Grasshopper sailed in company on the 13th of February. About 325 troops bound for Sumatra. Both ships were attacked by aircraft in the Bangka Straits, with Dragonfly hit 3 times and sinking quickly. Grasshopper was hit twice and set on fire, but her captain managed to beach on nearby Seba Islands. Both vessels severe loss of life, and most of the survivors were captured. Fall of Singapore has many, many problems in it. The first problem is that they hadn't got a proper plan for defence of the island and the defence of Malaysia. Second problem is that when they are defending the island, someone forgets to put some troops to secure the frigating reservoir, because if they had, instead of running out of water when they'd have had, the Japanese would have run out of logistics sooner. And thirdly, this is probably the most important thing. If you're going to rely on the sea for evacuation, please, Lord, make sure you have some fast boats. That fact that these vessels all were sunk in the same strait. What's worse to me is that they really don't have any other options of where to go. Although, myself, I'm not sure I'd have been withdrawing them in that direction. I can see why. It's water-wise, it's safer for them to go down there, but I'd have been pulling them up the other direction of Singapore Straits. I'd have tried to go out and at night to get as far away from Singapore north as possible. They're trying to get to Sumatra. They're trying to still be of help. I can see why they made a decision, but honestly, you need someone to be a bit of a... How do I put this? That is a good emotive decision of where to make. We can still be helpful, we can still fight in this war, we can still protect our allies. All good things. However, if the ships aren't going to make it, then there's no point in doing it, and it's a very high risk. Lower risk would have been to send them up the coast towards Burma. Down to hug the shore north. Get as far up the Indian Ocean as they can. Will they be useful? What use will they be then? Well, if they're just carrying their own crew and you can find the right weather, or maybe you can find a way of stowing them, you can probably get them across to Australia and bring them up from up there. They're up to help fight in the island campaign that goes on in Southeast Asia. But maybe you can't. But still, you get those 325 people who are useful to somewhere where they can be of use. And there are dozens of ships which go. Dozens of ships. One of the interesting notes made in the article is that, of course, that there weren't enough allocated spots to the Australian forces on the ships, and it gets problematic because theoretically, you'd say theoretically, they are allocating places based upon skill sets, i.e., who are the skill sets we most need to make sure we do not lose. But honestly, the whole thing seems to be an absolute mess. Singapore seems to be a mess, and I honestly think it's probably just more of an oversight than an intention because of the mess. Come on, the whole British Far Eastern strategy that had been developed in the interwar years fell apart. Well, fell apart really the moment you had both. You had war declared by first Germany, then Italy, because Britain was prepared for fighting a war, dun dun dun, not dun dun dun. And honestly, it would have been different if the British had reacted in 1933 to the Japanese leaving various programs, announcing they were going to leave the Washington Naval Treaty and the London Naval Treaty by actually starting to invest in their defence and procure and actually starting to build ships then. But instead they just invested a bit of infrastructure which was essential for them actually being able to do anything in World War II, but it meant that we were constantly behind the curve. We didn't have enough aircraft carriers, we didn't have enough capital ships, we didn't have enough cruisers, we didn't have enough destroyers, we didn't have enough of anything for all we found ourselves fighting. And what's worse is, to an extent, we see it coming. But one of the really terrible things, you have to admit, that we aren't prepared for, and haven't prepared for even though we can do, is the lack of sloops. They're probably sitting there going, Alex, why you bring up sloops? Sloops for anti-submarine could be used as anti-submarine warfare specialists. They were very good for that. Sloops could be built under the definitions of the Royal Navy, under the definitions of treaties, the various Article 8s, I think they are, from memory. They could be built as many as you like. As many as you like. No limitations. Total to either cumulative limitation at all. You can build as many as you like. And why would they have been useful? Because if they'd been available, the amount of routes they could go is very different to the routes a poor gunboat could have gone. And the routes a gunboat could have gone, if it was being escorted by sloops, are very different to the routes it went. And that limited down where they could go. So again, if you'd had a few more sloops, and one of the interesting things is some of the sloops are what get away from various places. And they're not much faster, they're not much better theoretically than a gunboat, but they are designed for oceanic work. And if you'd had a few more around, well, they'd have done the anti-submarine warfare work at the beginning of the war. We might not have lost an aircraft carrier through hunting submarines. We might not have lost Royal Oak. And those things add up. Royal Oak was the only upgraded R-class battleship. It would have been kind of useful to have it around, because it would have been the perfect thing, as an upgraded R-class, to deploy as a deterrent. Yes, it's not as fast as Prince of Wales or Repulse, but it was upgraded, so it could have been out there, and it would have probably been held back, so it wouldn't slow up 4C, but it could have been useful. For example, there's a cruiser, destroyers. Well, a cruiser and a pair of destroyers banking up against an upgraded R-class and a pair of destroyers, getting those boats out, that would have been a very different scenario. It would have been a case of, hello, Mr. Cruiser. And of course, conversely, the R-class are actually some of the better designed ships the Royal Navy has for dealing with the threat of air attack on their armour. If you look at their armour sign, they're not great. Okay, please don't. I'm not going to say that suddenly say that no, they're actually really good from this one perspective. They're not, but they are actually, because of the way their armour's been designed, actually slightly better at dealing with air attack than, well, definitely than a Repulse. Although that's not hard to be. But Singapore, Dunkirk are not the ends of the gunboat story. Neither in Europe nor in Mediterranean or the Far East. Gunboats are around. They're useful. They really are useful. And they have lots of purposes which are beyond that which we might normally consider them. Mainly because they have to have those uses. They have to be used for these things because, again, gunboats more and more remind me of sort of being the Trouble-class destroyers. Well, the same theories that underpins the Trouble-class destroyers. In the case of the steam gunboats especially, they are built, there are many ideas for why they're built, but primarily they are built due to the scarcity of suitable suitable diesel engines to hunt down Schnellboots, or as we tend to refer to them as E-boats. Now, they are built with that as their primary idea, but their secondary idea is to help get their motor torpedo boat cousins closer to enemy. These, honestly, produced and designed by Denny, they are the largest coastal force vessels built, and only ones built of steel. Most coastal force craft are built of wood. However, as powerful and as capable as they were, and they had two Metropolitan Vickers geared steam turbines, a single boiler driving two turbines and supplying two shafts, top speed of 35 knots in their original configuration, range of 200 nautical miles at full speed, 900 nautical miles at 12 knots. Crew grew from 27 to 34, and their final armament included a 3-inch gun, two single 6-pounder guns, two twin 20mm Oricon cannon, and two 21-inch torpedo tubes. There isn't much which wants to run into them, but the trouble is they have quite a big quite a big, which meant they were quite easy to spot at certain times, especially moonlight at night, in moonlight, which is a problem to have when you're a coastal forces. So they're not really a success, and one of the interesting things is SGB 1 and 2 aren't completed. SGB 3 Grey Seal, SGB 4 Grey Fox, SGB 5 Grey Owl, SGB 6 Grey Shark, SGB 8 Grey Wolf, all served through the war. Eventually they're converted to fast mine layers, and that's what they're used as. SGB 7 is lost before they got names, and SGB 9 Grey Goose is a really interesting one because she survives post World War II, and she's used as a propulsion trials vessel from 1952 to 1956, when her steam engines are replaced by Vospers with experimental Rolls-Royce RM60 gas turbines. Now, not only were these gas turbines pretty darn advanced, and she was the first vessel to be so powered, they featured intercooled compressors and recuperators to boost the turbine power output and reduce fuel consumption considerably. The gas turbine, it was found, provided 35% more power, weighed 50% less, and was 25% less bulky compared to the original steam machinery. This gave her a suitable speed bump. Hello. Now, it proved successful, but it was considered too complex and the supporting technology too immature for wider service at the time. So she's placed in reserve when trials end in 1957, and when after experimental engines are removed, she sold off in 1958. Now, she was then converted in 1984 to being a houseboat and renamed Ansevera. As of 2020, I haven't had more information about her since then, she's moored on the River Medway, near Hoo, in St Werburgh in Kent. However, you might have noticed that only a few of those are produced. That they, well, let's be honest, 7 are made out of the 9 ordered. Why? Because they're big, they're expensive. Instead, you need something still with guns to take out the lovely E-boats. So let's see, the first attempt is the Fairmile Sea Motor Gunboat. Fairmile Sea Motor Gunboat. It's cool. It's fast. Designed by Norman Hart. These were an intermediate design, and they completed 24 of them. They were trying to build something which would be a gunboat on the hull form of the Type A, the Fairmile A. Unfortunately, as effective as they turned out to be, and they did take part in Operation Chariot and a few others, and two survive to this day. One at Hailing Island, the other in Bembridge Harbour, Isle of Wight. Well, a third survived ashore until 2002. The one in Bembridge Harbour, Isle of Wight. There's one note that says was due to be broken up in 2018. There's another note which says this has yet to be confirmed, and it's now 2023. Now, I wrote these notes on the Fairmile Sea in 2017, so I should probably check that up. Sad if they have gone, because they're good ships. And again, John Lambert and Al Ross's Allied Coast Force of World War II, Volume 1, Fairmile Designs and US Submarine Chasers, is a very, very good read for this one. Published in 1990. There are newer versions, I think, available. Then we have the Fairmile D dogboats. Now, basically, what happened is the Royal Navy looked at the Fairmile Sea and said, well, you know, we like them, but we need them to be bigger. And they looked at the Fairmile B, and they looked at the Fairmile A, and they looked at the Fairmile C and said, well, let's build something which can be both a motor torpedo boat and a motor gunboat. And so, they get produced in multiple forms. We have the motor gunboat, MGB, the motor torpedo boat. Then we have long-range recovery class craft, aka the LRCs. What is known as an MASB, or /ASB, which of course is motor anti-submarine boat. And fast patrol boats, well, post-World War, but they were used by them during World War II. Two capture boats actually serve with a Kriegsmarine, and they are cool boats, and there is a very good book about them, literally just sitting next to me, called Dog Boats at War, which talks about all the other things they get up to. Now, one interesting thing is LRSC is sometimes translated as long-range raiding craft. It was recovery craft for the Royal Air Force, for their Marine branch, for their air search rescue, but they are used for long-range raiding as well. And usually they're just reconfigured as they need to be. They might be with a gunboat flotilla, they might be with a torpedo boat flotilla, there might be gunboats and torpedo boats in a mixed flotilla. As time goes on, things change. Some of the boats went out to sea looking like they hadn't made up their mind whether they were a gunboat or a torpedo boat and were trying to carry everything. And I mean trying to carry everything. But they are good vessels. If we consider fitted to one vessel, at the end of the war, she carried 2 single 6-pounder guns, 4 20mm Oricon in 2 singles and 1 twin, 2 twin 303 Vickers K guns, 4 light boat depth charges, searchlight, TSA smoke generator, and fitted for but not with 2 torpedoes. You gotta love that. Although, seriously, once they're carrying that much weight, there aren't many things which are going to want to stop them. Again, 29 knots maximum speed at full load, thanks to Packard 4M 2,500 petrol engines. Total of 5,000 horsepower. Again, remember that, 5,000 horsepower for something which weighs in its standard load as 104 tons, fully loaded as 120 tons as an MTB, standard load as an MGB 91 tons, full load 109 tons. And think about that when we were talking about the vessels earlier, the Dragonfly class with 3,800 shaft horsepower. Starting to see the performance differential? Now, yes, the guns and the firepower has gone down to an extent, but the speed has gone up. And again, these vessels, their role is to deal with Schnell boats, their role is to protect convoys, to attack enemy convoys, and if we look at this classic drawing, which we had here at the beginning, sorry about that, there we go. You'll notice that the motor torpedo boats attack from inshore, the motor gunboats attack from offshore, i.e. from the sea side, and the motor torpedo boats come in from the shore side to attack a convoy. So the enemy has a problem. The boats which are coming in fast and firing at them and revealing their positions, well, if they concentrate and fire back at them, that's great. Then they're not going to be fighting the torpedo boats and firing at torpedo boats. Because often what would happen is the gunboats would come blaring in, blasting away with everything. This would illuminate the targets because they'd either fire back or they get hit. Then torpedo boats would come in and loose their torpedoes. And after they loose their torpedoes, then they'd open up with their guns. You have to decide, what's your biggest threat? The motor gunboat, which is blasting away with you with small arms, or rather, well, it's a 6-pounder, not the most powerful weapon known to mankind. It's a perfectly decent, useful system, but it is only a 6-pounder. So, you know, it's only a 57mm. Or the 21-inch torpedo, which is going to be coming at you. Decide which is the threat you want to worry about. It's kind of like the sword of Damocles either way, isn't it? Then we have Soviet gunboats, right? So these are an interesting scenario, but basically they are born of the fruit of two problems for the Soviet Union. One, logistics was terrible. Two, they had a lot of tank turrets. As you have seen recently with the news being quite heavily dominated by stuff going on in Eastern Europe, there are a lot of rather large rivers. They need to be crossed at various points. They offer an opportunity for supporting the forces in manoeuvres, but also, more importantly, they are restrictions on your forces which you need to cross, and you're going to need firepower to be able to cross them. Gunboats are part of this. Soviet gunboats are critical to their riverine operations and to their coastal operations. They built a lot of them. They really did. Now, usually I talk about the BKA 1124 classes, but they're also the Zelenoskov class of riverine monitors, which were also produced in 1934, and they built a lot of vessels during World War II. And they got into a lot of combat. Now, they were constructed en masse. 60 of these were in service during the German invasion. 150 were built. And they didn't just come with 2 turrets. Oh, no, no. Some of them came in, if I can get the flick on, this form. Oh, yeah. With a Katyusha rocket launcher in the rear and the gun turret on the front. Basically, this is your mobile fire support nightmare. You've got indirect fire from the rockets, you've got direct fire from the tank turret, and you also have cannon. There are small countries which today would still not like something like that to churn up on their river. They produced not just a lot of these, but honestly, it's kind of like the tank production in that the numbers of vessels being produced, there are the numbers which are officially produced, there are numbers which are likely produced, but then there's quite a lot which seem to go back to the factory when they've been severely damaged, rebuilt, and then come out again, and sometimes added to the total of constructed. And you sit there and go, well, considering the level of damage you repaired, perhaps you are arguable on that one. After this class, they then developed into the 1125, which did, as standard, come with the Katusha. And, well, two sort of cannon turrets, and one tank turret. They are fun. And it just goes on. The idea of fitting more and more tank turrets onto a gunboat, or different tank turrets onto the gunboat, just keeps coming up. And it's... what can I say, really? They're useful. But they are definitely, in terms of gunboat production, they're not exactly fast. They're not exactly elegant. They are purely built for warfighting, with the materials and systems which are available at the time, including the firing and aiming mechanisms of those turrets. They literally are just a tank turret taken off and stuck on a boat. That is it. And the boat doesn't have the armour of a tank. Speaking of rough and ready, now, as a rule, we listen to discussions of American PT boats and go, that's acting as a gunboat. Well, they did actually have some specialist gunboats that were converted from the SC-497 class submarine chasers. They didn't build many of them. Mainly they relied upon mass of their torpedo boats. You're sending in enough, they bring their own firepower with them. And if you're talking about a certain future presence vessel, find various anti-tank guns and adapt them to their own purposes. But they did build vessels, like the PGM ones, which weren't bad. They're not really great. They're armed with usually a single 3-inch gun, a 40mm gun, 4 twin 50 cals, and a 60mm mortar. It's nothing to be sneezed at, but it's also a case of not exactly heavy firepower. The same can be said for the PGM-9s. They're good vessels. They are adaptations of the PC-461 class submarine chaser, which is there, which is a bigger, heavier vessel, which has more firepower. Usually, again, they start off in terms of the submarine chaser with a 3-inch 50 gun, a 3-inch 50 or a 40mm aft, and 3 or 5 20mm single-mounted cannons. However, they do have a top speed of 20.2 knots. You're probably going to guess what I'm going to say in a second. The gunboat version has one 3-inch 50 dual-purpose gun, one twin 40mm gun, 6 20mm cannon, 2 50 cal machine guns, and a rocket launcher. And a top speed of 20.2 knots. They were supposed to support the PT boats in the Pacific. They were supposed to provide them with fire support and protect them, but surprisingly, top speed of 20 knots versus a PT boat which has a top speed of... well, let me give you the official top speed. The official top speed was 45 to 50 knots. increases to weaponry tend to take this round down. But if you can go that fast, why be tootling around at 20 knots? I mean, there's an argument that the steam gunboats from earlier, the British ones, the grey sort of class, as they were called at various points, with their top speed of 35 knots, would sort of be a viable for keeping up on them. Cruising along at 30 odd knots, they could probably do okay. But they couldn't keep up with them attack speed. You need a Manxman, a Deal class, to do so. USN could have built something to do so, and the problem here is the USN themselves. The vessels they're picking to convert into gunboats. They know the PT boats need fire support. They know they need something to give them protection and give them top cover. Because, again, they see what the British are doing. And one of the interesting things you find about the Fairmile Ds, especially, is they turn up everywhere. I mean, the British are sending them everywhere they can. They're just the D's equipped the Royal Canadian Navy, the Royal Navy, the Royal Norwegian Navy. I'm fairly sure the C's equip almost every variation of Royal Navy, something or whatever that you've got going. The remaining Fairmiles certainly do. And the US Navy sees what the British are using them for. They see what the British and the British-inspired navies are using them for. And they want some of that action. But then they pick something which is... Well, they go, oh, yeah, we've got this vessel. It's the right size. It is the right size. But you need to pretty much quadruple its engines to have even a chance. Even a chance. That's... the thing is, again, you're converting a subchaser, which is designed like a flower class. It's designed to keep going and chugging along at a constant speed and help look after a convoy. And hunt submarines, which are not the fastest things known to mankind, especially at this time. It's not going to be the speed you need. So in peacetime, gunboats are the equivalents of modern-day helicopters. They are a way of projecting power inshore, often land thanks to rivers and other channels. In wartime, they provide fire support for amphibious operations, for torpedo boats, mine laying, and mine sweeping. They provide for a myriad of small but necessary functions that are easy to overlook but very difficult to do without. These vessels, without them protecting your coastal convoys, without them interdicting enemy coastal convoys, without them doing all the little jobs they're doing, your life in war becomes massively more complicated and difficult. Massively so. I don't know. I hope you found it interesting. This has been a sort of a skip through the small ships for big missions mantra, and that sort of undertone I've got going on the channel. And I'm going to keep doing little videos about gunboats and things and motor torpedo boats when they come up and when I can, because they matter. And history should be about what matters. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And today's question is going to be, if you're the US Navy in 1942 and you've decided you need to provide a gunboat to support your your PT boats, your motor torpedo boats, what do you pick? Which vessel? Because the rule is you've got to convert something which is off the shelf but is small enough that it's not going to require a massive crew. So it can't be a destroyer. It can't be any of your bigger vessels. You've got to think, what do you do? Do you buy a British one? Do you adapt a British one? Do you find something else? Surely you have something there. I'd love to hear what you think they should have done. And I'd love to hear you think if it would have been useful or not, because as it stands, people turn around and go, "Oh, they weren't useful. They didn't do anything." Well, of course they couldn't. They couldn't keep up with the torpedo boats. So that's really not fair on them. They were designed for a mission, and then they were never going to be able to do because they'd lost out at the very process when they were selecting the actual hull with power plant. Oh. Thank you for watching. Ooh, we've got the Where Are the Dalmatians tomorrow, which is going to be assembling of that. HMS Belfast from Corby. Thank you very much, whoever sent that to me, by the way. And yeah, looks like I've got an interesting week coming up. And of course, Sunday is when we'll announce the winner of the patron vote. So find out whose patron 72 and 73 topics are on Sunday. Take care, everyone. Toodles. This is why your papa shouldn't have a full pizza for lunch. Even if it was only a small one. Makes me very tired. Not more food than I'm used to.